This is Nasha Kasha, Ukrainian Almanac. 28 minutes of stories for everyone about Ukrainian life. I'm your reporter, Stefan Andrusyan. Diplomat is a foreign affairs news site for the diplomatic, consular, political, and business community of Ireland. Writing in the online publication, Oksana Sadrina O'Hurley points to archaeological discoveries and DNA testing that she says confirms Ireland's earliest inhabitants originated from an area north of the Black Sea that is now the territory of Ukraine. This is my 250th episode. Coinciding as it does with St. Patrick's Day must be a lucky charm. In September of 2015, my wife Larissa and I had the pleasure of visiting Ireland. I climbed the narrow, winding, uneven steps at Blarney Castle, and I kissed the legendary jewel of eloquence, the Blarney Stone. The Ukrainian nation and the people of the land of St. Patrick have experienced remarkable similarities in their separate histories. Having kissed the Blarney Stone, it dawned on me that people living in Ukraine today, living outside of their own native country, are all called expats. So to Pats and to expats everywhere, I hope you had a wonderful St. Patrick's Day this year. Montreal is my city of birth and youth. It's a city I still visit once a month. Today, I will take you to my best friend's home in that city for some in-depth research about Irish-Ukrainian encounters. Then it's off to Hurley's Pub downtown to meet with Jerry Gudzio, a Ukrainian descendant who plays some wonderful Irish music. And he'll tell us about his involvement in Shimsa, the School of Irish Music. But first, right here on the campus of Western University, we'll hear from Professor Emeritus Ninian Malamfi. I met him at our early morning exercise class on the campus of Western University. While others were going through their morning regimens, we stepped away and we spoke in a rather echoey locker room.
My name is Ninian Malamfi. I was born in Kilkenny somewhat over 80 years ago, and I've been in Canada since 1961, so I'm kind of settling in here. I spent my life as a professor of English, chiefly at Western, teaching Shakespeare and other courses.
I've been reflecting on the similarities between the two cultures. Ireland was called Micro-Britannia by the Romans. Ukraine was called Mala, small, Rossiya by the Russians.
Yes. Yeah.
We have a situation where there is internal strife, and we live on the border of a very powerful and imposing neighbor. The songs of struggle in both cultures, and there was a horrible famine in Ukraine. There was one in Ireland. The one in Ukraine was man-made.
Yeah, well, I grew up, I was born in a place called Kilkenny, but I grew up with my grandparents in County Kerry following my mother's death when I was 3. We lived really in a country that was very much aware of the history of the past, going way back to St. Patrick, but especially going back to the 19th century, when that famine that decimated Ireland it happened because of the dependence of the people on the potato as their main source of food. The country itself was producing remarkably good crops of corn, wheat, and oats and barley and so on that were being exported to England while people starved on the side of the road. We lived with a very, very strong memory of our present as defined by the past. In 1914, there was a Home Rule passed by the British government, more or less guaranteeing Ireland independence, or like a form of independence, but it was postponed because of the war, and people knew that ultimately there was such a strong kind of anti-Irish flavour in British culture that even though the Act of Parliament had been passed, it probably would never have been properly enacted. So what you had then was a revolution by a very select number of people who were, I suppose, the descendants of the people called the Fenians. They didn't believe in parliamentary independence. They believed in the power of the gun. They began that revolution on Easter Monday of 1916 without anything like the will of the people being represented, and they were actually resented very powerfully for that first week when they took over the General Post Office in Dublin and other buildings, and eventually they succumbed to British power. And then the British did the most stupid thing in the world. They shot 16 of them. The shooting of those people in May of 1916 made them revolutionaries and martyrs.
The British gave them currency, gave their legacy currency where it hadn't fully existed before that.
That's right, exactly. Canada was, in a sense, in the First World War, beginning to define itself in terms of its battles in the north of Europe. Ireland was defining itself in terms of its martyrs.
If I was to ask you to give a toast or a saying of friendship to fellow travelers who are here through history, who are of Ukrainian background, could you find the words to do that?
Yeah, I think that, like the Irish, what would be their most familiar and most meaningful gesture would be looking back over their shoulders at themselves. In other words, they can't escape from history and are formed by it and will never forget it. And so you can see this in Ukraine, in the Ukraine today, as you can see it in Ireland.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
I have called him many names: Zenon, Zeni, Zach, Zenko. Zenko's mother and my mom, when she was alive, were best friends. When my parents married, they sublet a room from Zeni's parents in the same apartment. He and I were born on the same day, in the same year, in the same hospital, the Royal Victoria in Montreal. Zeni married Laurie 30 years ago, and it's her expertise on Irish-Ukrainian encounters that I've come to explore on this occasion.
Hello, my name is Lorraine Mines. I'm a native Montrealer of Irish-French heritage. I was born in Point St. Charles, and when I was 1.5, we moved to Verdun, so I really grew up in Verdun.
And just for people who are listening in America, what's the difference? Give me a characterization of those two areas.
If you're a native from Point St. Charles, we don't call it Point St. Charles, we call it the Point. For an Irish person in Montreal, if you're from the Point, it's a very special place to be, and it's in your soul forever.
Because that's the heritage, that's where people landed?
I believe so. They landed at around Bridge Street. There's a statue, I believe, of the people that died of typhoid on the boats, and it's a very special area, Griffintown, Point St. Charles. I believe it was during the famine years that the Irish came in a huge influx. They came a little bit before and maybe after, but that around 1847, 1855 was around the time of the famine, and a lot of people came during that time.
Tell me about being your father's daughter. He was a proud Irishman.
Well, he was very special, and I had a very close relationship with my dad. I never thought of myself as Canadian, as bad as that sounds, although I'm proud to be a Canadian today, but I always felt I was Irish first. I was raised in an environment where our life was surrounded by the school and the church, and it was all Catholic, and a great majority of the people were Irish Catholics. So I think it's just your identity. You identify with that, and it's very special. I'm very proud to say I'm Irish. It just means a lot to me. It's who I am. It's who being Catholic, being Irish is my identity.
Now, your mama was Quebecois.
Well, she was half Irish. Her mom was a Healy. She was from Newfoundland. Her mom was born in Newfoundland, and she has very strong Irish heritage as well through her mother. Healy is a very Irish name, and that was their background. So I'm very proud that they're from Newfoundland and they're Irish, and my mom's dad was French Canadian, so I'm proud of that heritage too.
You married a Ukrainian.
Yes. It was a bit of a shock of cultures, I have to say. It's a very different culture, but I think after all these years, 30 years, I think you learn to enjoy the different cultural aspects. It's also, my husband was a Ukrainian Catholic, so our religion, that was very close. So you adapt because a lot of the attitudes are the same. I love the history and I love the music, and it's just nice to have. I'm glad our son has a dual identity of the Irish, and he does though relate more to Ukrainian heritage than Irish. But I think it's good to see a lot of different cultures and have that experience.
Okay, so the Point Verdun in the bosom of Irish love, you walk into the middle of the Ukrainian culture. What was the welcome like?
It was a bit of culture shock, I have to say, initially, because a lot of when we would go to activities, people spoke only in Ukrainian. At the time, I didn't understand it. So you felt a little bit as an outsider, even though I'm born in Montreal. So that was a bit of that took some time to get used to.
Did you feel welcome?
Yes, I did, especially from the people my age and younger, definitely. I think some of the older people were didn't understand me. So I think that took some time. But no, I did feel very welcome from the people that are of my own generation, because most of them went to school here and were more Canadian as I was.
You can speak some Ukrainian. You actually took courses in Ukrainian.
I did. I love language. I have to say that I don't know Irish Celtic as much as I would love to learn Gaelic. It's a very difficult language if you don't know it. But I did go, my son went to Ukrainian school, and I took a few courses when they were offering them to adults who were not fluent or who knew nothing about the Ukrainian language.
Did you shock people in that they were talking about you and you understood and maybe answered?
I think people are still shocked that I do understand a lot. We had the priest come and bless the house the other day, and he said to me I could say it in English, and I said, no, that's fine. I understand.
Okay, tell me about Tony and growing up. Was it a challenge for him to have two cultures?
His first language, I suppose, would be English, but his second language is Ukrainian, and third French. So I think, Ukrainian is second nature to him, because he was very close to his grandparents, and he was close to my mom as well. He didn't know my father, sadly. My father died when I was quite young, so he didn't know my father. But, I don't think he found it. It was just very completely natural. If a child learns cultures and language from day one, basically, he, I think, would consider himself Ukrainian before anything else.
Can you tell me any stories about the Irish characters in your life?
I think the biggest influence was my father and his family, and every night he sang Irish songs. He would come home from work, have a cup of tea, and just sit on the sofa and sing, which I thought was quite normal until I found out not everyone does that. I realize now, reading a lot of literature on the Irish, that they're storytellers, and my dad was definitely, he was a marvelous storyteller, and he had a lovely Irish tenor voice. He had an amazing voice, as did my Aunt Noreen. My Uncle Frank's wife had a beautiful Irish voice, and they sang all the time, and they sang constantly in the house. It was just something you did, like a Hollywood musical. So I grew up with someone who was very easygoing and very happy, and he just sang all the time, and he wrote poetry, and he loved reading, even though we didn't have a lot of books in the house because we couldn't afford them in those days. But he would read all our school books, and he read amazing authors that I read after he passed away, not knowing that he had read them.
In closing, could you just utter a few thoughts about St. Patrick's Day and just the feeling?
For me, it's my identity and my reality, and it brings me back to memories of childhood, to my uncles and aunts, and it's just a beautiful time. And my house is usually covered in green. Living with the Ukrainian person, they were initially in shock, but he's adapted to having a house covered in green every March 17th. At the moment, I find it in some ways now sad because my parents are both gone, and I'm being the youngest cousin. A lot of my cousins are gone, and all of my aunts and uncles, so that reality is gone. So it's a sad time at certain points because I don't have that part of my soul is a bit missing at times, but still it's it's who I am. In that respect, it's an important day.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of times knowing you that you've said, I'm Irish, don't mess with me.
Well, I with my voice, I do surprise people because you have a certain belief and you'll stand up for it. And I think that's a very Irish character trait, to stand up for your beliefs. So I think that's why I say that.
in your soft-spoken manner. Just in closing, is there something you'd like to say that I haven't asked you because I didn't know to ask?
Oh, wow. I don't know, Steve. I just hope you've enjoyed having a friend who's Irish.
I absolutely have. Thank you. And many more years. Mnoha elita.
Дякую.
This is Nasha Kasha, Ukrainian Almanac. We're heard on CHRW-FM in London, CKLU-FM in Sudbury, CILU-FM in Thunder Bay, CKMS-FM in Kitchener, CFMU-FM in Hamilton, on CFRC-FM in Kingston, and on CJLO-AM in Montreal. Here's Scythian, a Celtic group from Washington, D.C. They're Ukrainian.
Well, I took a stroll down the old long walk of a day, and I met a little girl and we stopped to talk of a fine soft day. And I asked you, friend, what's a fella to do? 'Cause her hair was black and her eyes were blue. And I knew right then I'd be taking a whirl round a Salt Hill prom with a Galway girl. We were halfway there when the rain came down of a day, and she asked me up to a flat downtown of a fine soft day. And I asked you, friend, what's a fella to do? 'Cause her hair was black and her eyes were blue. So I took her hand and I gave her a twirl, and I lost my heart to a Galway girl. When I woke up, I was all alone. With a broken heart and a ticket home. And I ask you now, tell me what would you do if her hair was black and her eyes were blue? And I traveled around, I've been all over this world. Boys, I've never seen nothing like a Galway girl. And I traveled around, I've been all over this world. Boys, I've never seen nothing like a Galway girl.
Okay, so that's Scythian and Galway Girl. It's on their It's Not Too Late album, available on iTunes. Now here's a song about a Ukrainian girl, none other than Hutzulka Ksenia, done their way. It's on their album called American Shanty.
Перші з нас остини, і слова різні любовні, він до неї промовляв. Я повинна любити, лише ні цілий світі, жар до душу, душа
Nasha Kasha comes to you from Radio Western 94.9 FM on the campus of Western University in London, Ontario, Canada. We're heard on CHMR 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland, on CKDU 88.1 FM in Halifax, on Local 107.3 FM in St. John, New Brunswick, on CJAS Radio 93.5 FM in San Augustine, Quebec, on CJLO 1690 AM in Montreal, on CFRC 101.9 FM in Kingston, on CFMU 93.3 FM in Hamilton, on CKMS 102.7 FM in Kitchener-Waterloo, on CJAM 99.1 FM in Windsor and Detroit, on CKLU 96.7 FM in Sudbury, on CILU 102.7 FM in Thunder Bay, on 101.5 UMFM in Winnipeg, on CJTR 91.3 FM in Regina, on CFMQ 98.1 FM in Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, on CFBX 92.5 FM in Kamloops, on CJSF 90.1 FM in Vancouver, and on CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo, British Columbia. My final report for this episode was recorded late in 2014. I hope you're enjoying the program. If you'd like to comment or to suggest a story in your community, write me. My email address is steve.andrusiak@simpatico.ca. Nasha Kasha is commercial-free. We follow the ethical guidelines of CHRW-FM and of the Radio Television News Directors Association of Canada. The end of January is typically the coldest part of a Montreal winter, but here it was, only December 1st, 2014. And as I left the Guy Street metro station across from the downtown campus of Concordia University, a gust of night chill air gave me notice of what would become the coldest Montreal winter in more than a century. I hurried along, and I was happy because I was about to meet with a friend I hadn't seen for decades. A few weeks earlier, in a Facebook posting, Jerry Guzio had described his travels through Ireland with his daughter and with his guitar. On that trip, he had jammed in some of the most historic pubs in Ireland. He simply showed up, opened his guitar case, and was invited to sing and play.
On the banks of the roses, me love and I sat down, and I took out me fiddle for to play me love a tune. And in the middle of the tune, oh, she smiled and she said, "Yeah, Johnny, lovely Johnny, would you leave me?"
I pushed south along Crescent Street, and after prying open the front door, I rushed into the warmth of Hurley's Irish Pub. Now, the Jerry Guzio I remember had been lead singer for a popular Montreal Ukrainian band called Sinestipiu, which means Sons of the Steppe. That was back in the 1970s. Ukrainian music heartthrob, now an Irish pub musician. The group is called Shimsa, which is Irish or Gaelic for pleasant musical diversion. I ordered a pint and sat down. Shimsa is also a classroom for Irish music. The course is offered at Marianapolis College. Students need no musical training to enroll. They meet in small groups, 3 to 5 people, for an hour each week. There are 12 classes each fall, 12 more every winter. They also have a choir. Jerry is a retired teacher, having taught at the grade school and high school levels.
After Sinestipiu, which was 1978, I became a teacher. I worked as a teacher for 32 years in the New Frontier School Board, music and English. I am soft-spoken, as you can tell. I wish I would have had a harsher voice, a tougher voice, but I managed in my 32-year career with this voice of mine. I actually have a photo on my Facebook account of a Ukrainian and Irish flag intertwined. So I've got a Ukrainian and Irish soul.
Here on this night, a sense of courtesy and contentment prevails. No one shows off. A man in the corner plays the most modest of instruments, an Irish whistle. But his day job is with the Faculty of Music at McGill University. He is the Dean of Music at McGill University.
You try not to be the one always starting the tune. You give other people a chance. So everyone's very considerate of one another.
Dennis Martin is the director of Shimsa.
I'm a chemist by profession.
It's a beautiful chemistry you have here.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah. There's a lot of giving. The individual instrument is a personal journey. People learning that instrument, it's a very personal thing. But when you get to the point where you're playing together, you're really sharing a wonderful gift. A gift that includes music that goes back hundreds of years. And to keep it alive, share it together, it's a wonderful thing.
Playing Ukrainian music, I just love the songs so much. And I find these Irish songs give me the same kind of feeling, the love of the music that I feel.
Nasha Kasha is also a podcast. There's an easy way to access it for free. Go to nashakasha.libsyn.com. Nasha Kasha is one word. Libsyn is spelled LIBSYN.com. nashakasha.libsyn.com. New Pathway Ukrainian News delivers news and insight every week in English and Ukrainian. Subscribe today at newpathway.ca. Partial funding for Nasha Kasha comes from the Taras Shevchenko Foundation and the Ukrainian Credit Union. I'm your reporter Stefan Andrusiak. Back in a week, God willing. До милої зустрічі. За тиждень часу, дорогі слухачі.